Hello everyone, Hyper here, and welcome to the Battle for Azeroth Frost Decay preview. In this video, we'll go over all of the talents and abilities that were added, removed, or changed in any sort of way. First of all, Frost Decay went through two major sets of changes. The first one I covered in a separate video, and then instead of making a second video about just the most recent changes, I decided that it's time to just release the preview, because I feel like Frost Decay is looking like this could be the final state that it will go live with. Obviously, there still will be number tuning, but no major changes, hopefully. Frost Decay didn't really lose any baseline abilities other than Wraithwalk, but that was added as a talent, so it's not really lost. We also got a new ability, which was added also to Unholy and to Blood, and this is Death's Advance. The passive of this ability makes it so you cannot be slowed below 70% movement speed, and then the active is an 8-second duration where you can't be slowed below 100% and you're immune to knockbacks and pushbacks, and you move 30% faster. As far as the baseline abilities and passives that were changed, our mastery now only increases the frost damage of our abilities, so this removes its interaction with trinkets and some Azerite traits. Death Strike healing was buffed from 20% to 30% of recent damage taken, and Race Ally now costs 30 runic power to cast. Icebound Fortitude was also buffed from 20% DR to 30%. And then the next two changes are kind of the more major ones. Pillar of Frost was changed from a 20% strength boost for 20 seconds on a minute cooldown to a 15% for 15 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. But they also added the mechanic that you gain 1% additional strength per rune spent, similar to the TOS set bonus. Empowered Rune Weapon was also changed, and it works essentially the same way Hungering Rune Weapon worked in Legion. It is on a 1-minute cooldown that grants you 15% haste, 1 rune and 5 runic power instantly, and then every 5 seconds for 10 seconds. Let's take a quick look at our talent tree. In Tier 1, all of the talents boost the damage of other abilities. Shattering Strikes was removed and was replaced by Cold Heart. This works essentially like the legendary in Legion, but it doesn't stun, and the stacks cap at 15 rather than 20. Icy Talons was nerfed from 12% haste per stack down to 5%, but they made it so Breath of Sindragosa applies or refreshes your stacks whenever it ticks, so that's a very nice change. Runic Attenuation was moved to Tier 2 and was replaced by Inexorable Assault, which was also reworked to generate a stack every 8 seconds, and this empowers your next Obliterate, and the stacks cap at 5. Tier 2 is our resource row. Freezing Fog was removed and was replaced by Runic Attenuation, which was also slightly reworked to generate runic power based on procs per minute system, rather than with each melee attack, so this will just keep it more even throughout the expansion. Murderous Efficiency works the same way, and Horn of Winter RP gain was buffed from 20 runic power to 25. Then in Tier 3, this is now our utility row. Abomination's Might was removed and was replaced by Asphyxiate, and this is just a 4-second single target stun. Winter is Coming was slightly changed to not require Pillar of Frost anymore, but now instead of stunning, it only roots enemies for 8 seconds. Blinding Sleet Disorient was also slightly buffed, but it is now on the global cooldown. In Tier 4, this is our AoE row. Ice Capped was moved to the last row, and Glacial Advance was moved to Tier 6. Avalanche was changed to now trigger whenever you use Howling Blast with a Rhyme proc, rather than crits during Pillar of Frost. Frozen Pulse was also changed to proc when you have 2 or less runes full, rather than just 1. And then Frostbite is unchanged, other than tuning, obviously. Then Tier 5, this is our defensive and mobility row. Volatile Shielding was removed, and Inexorable Assault was moved to Tier 1, and Wraithwalk is now a talent. And then also in this row, Deathpact is a new talent that heals us for 50% of our max HP, but it applies a debuff that absorbs 30% of your max HP. Permafrost was nerfed from 100% to 40% of auto attacks, and that is mostly to compensate for the increase in melee damage. Tier 6 is another AoE row, where Gathering Storm is unchanged. Glacial Advance was changed to cost 30 runic power instead of 1 rune, and the cooldown on it was reduced to 6 seconds, and it now also applies Razor Eyes to enemies. And then the third talent in this row, Frostworm's Fury, is essentially just Sindragosa's Fury but on a 3-minute cooldown. In the last tier, this is our cooldowns row. Hungering Rune Weapon was removed and was replaced by Ice Cap, which is unchanged from Legion. Obliteration is now a passive talent that activates during Pillar of Frost, so you can weave abilities the entire duration of POF. Breath of Sindragosa is also unchanged from Legion. Let's take a quick look at some potential talent builds, and I'm really only going to go over 3 and then explain some other potential ones that we will see in BFA. The first one here is our AoE talent. This is pure AoE and we're trying to maximize trash damage and sustained AoE. So in the first row we take Cold Heart because obviously on AoE we won't be casting Obliterate, so Inexorable Assault is not that useful, and since we're taking Glacial Advance we won't have the runic power to keep up Icy talents, so that just leaves us with Cold Heart by default. In the second row we take Murderous Efficiency just to get those extra runes whenever we consume killing machines. And then in tier 4, obviously we take Frostsight because that is a very good ability when you have a large number of enemies. In tier 6, we take Glacial Advance since this does the most sustained damage in AoE. If we're looking for burst damage, obviously Frostworm's Fury would be more beneficial. And then in the last row, I prefer using Ice Cap, but I have played around with Obliteration a little bit. However, if you're not getting those crits and you don't get the perfect weaving, it's a little bit awkward to use. And also, especially in dungeons, having Pillar of Frost active more often is much more beneficial. The playstyle of this build is very simple. The idea behind it is that you use your Cold Heart stacks during Pillar of Frost on priority targets, so whatever high HP mob you're trying to kill first. And then you want to keep your Remorseless Winter on cooldown, your Glacial Advance on cooldown, and then spend your runes with Frostsight. With my current amount of haste, I'm not able to really get too many Frost Strikes in. Maybe I sneak 1 or 2 in there, but overall, most of your runic power will go into Glacial Advance. And then obviously with Pillar of Frost and Empowered Rune Weapon, you want to use them whenever they're up. The cooldown on Pillar of Frost will be offset from Empowered Rune Weapon because of the Ice Cap talent, but about every other Pillar of Frost will line up with Empowered Rune Weapon, roughly, depending on how many procs you get. The second build here is the Breath of Sindragosa build. In the first tier, we take Icy Talent, since now it does get triggered by Breath of Sindragosa, and we also want that increased haste so we get runes back faster. In tier 2, I prefer taking Horn of Winter, especially early in the expansion, because you just get resources on demand. Then in tier 4, this will be a simple sim where either Frozen Pulse or Avalanche will be better, depending on how the numbers are tuned. Then tier 6, we have the choice between Gathering Storm and Frostworm's Fury. So depending on boss fight, I can see either of these being better. I will take Gathering Storm right now because Frostworm's Fury, whenever you use it, you don't gain any runic power, and I don't want to clutter up my rotation even more because I already have a bunch of things I need to press on the global cooldown. And then in the last tier, obviously we take Breath of Sindragosa. This build plays essentially the way it did back in Nighthold, where you had access to Breath of Sindragosa along with Hungering Rune Weapon, and then you could also take Runic Attenuation, or you could take Horn of Winter. Early on in expansion, Horn of Winter is usually better because you don't have enough haste, or in Legion we didn't have enough haste to generate enough runic power from RA. But then in Nighthold, obviously we had the set bonus, and now that RA is actually based on procs per minute, while it might be more runic power over a longer period of time, Horn of Winter gives us more runic power in the duration of our Breath of Sindragosa, so I prefer using it over RA. And then the playstyle, obviously, like I said before, is essentially the same, where you want to keep your Remorseless Winter on cooldown, and as you run in, you want to build up runic power, get to almost 100, and then pop your Breath of Sindragosa, your Pillar of Frost, and then whenever you need some extra runes, you pop Empowered Rune Weapon on top of it to get some more rune regen, haste, and some extra runic power. And then after your Breath of Sindragosa falls off, you just want to keep your Icy Talent stacks up, And you will want to start setting up for your second Breath of Sindragosa a little bit sooner than you're probably used to, because you need to be spending runic power to keeping up your Icy Talent stacks. And that takes quite a bit of runic power, especially because the duration is so short. So your one option is to build up runic power to almost 100 and letting your IT stacks falls off. And then the other option is to just try to keep it up and kind of build runic power over time and conserve runic power as much as you can for the second Breath of Sindragosa. The third build we have here is our Obliteration build. In the first row we take Inexorable Assault because we will be casting Obliterates quite often, so we want to empower them. And also we don't want to add an extra GCD in our pillar, so we don't really want to take Cold Heart. Obviously if the damage is significantly better, we will end up taking it anyway. In the second row, we take Murderous Efficiency just for some extra runes. And then fourth row again, this will come down to tuning between Frozen Pulse and Avalanche. Then in tier 6, the choice between is the same, Gathering Storm or Frostworm's Fury, based on fight length, if you need burst damage versus sustained damage. There's a few things to take into consideration whenever making that choice. And then in the last row, obviously, we will take Obliteration, so we can get that passive added to our Pillar of Frost. This build also plays very similar to current Frost DK and Taurus, obviously discounting Shattering Strikes. But the idea is that you run in, get in a few cooldowns, then you get Empowered Rune Weapon up, then Pillar of Frost, and then you just want to weave your abilities. So you Obliterate, Frost Strike, Obliterate, Frost Strike, and then if you get Rhyme procs, then you use those to trigger your Killing Machine. And then outside of that, you just want to use all your procs and obviously keep your Remorseless Winter on cooldown. So what are my overall impressions of the Frost DK? Overall, the changes have been pretty nice, but it's nothing really new. It feels a lot like Legion, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, we get Dragon back, we get Cold Heart back, and they rearranged some of the talent rows to make more sense. I expressed some of my concerns about, especially the last row where Ice Cap and Obliteration don't really feel all that great. But other than that, Frost DK feels pretty decent overall. Obviously, I will be maining Frost or DK in general in BFA, either Frost or Unholy, whichever becomes better. And for raiding, Frost DK was always kind of one of those classes where you usually have one, maybe two of them in the raid. And since we have two DPS specs, the odds of either one being at least pretty decent is fairly high. As far as utility goes, we still have Death Grip, which is now on a utility cooldown, so it's a half a GCD. And then, as far as defensives go, AMS is a little bit weaker now than it was in Legion, especially since it doesn't dispel, so we lost a Mirror Ball talent. And then our Icebound was slightly buffed, which is a very nice change, but during it, we're not going to be healing for an insane amount with our Death Strikes like we did in Legion, so again, upsides and downsides. As far as raiding, Frost DK or Unholy DK will most likely be pretty decent. And then for Mythic Plus, we will probably be in the same tier as we were in Legion, where if Frost DK will be good to pushing some fairly high keys, but it's probably not going to be one of those classes that you bring at the very, very top level, because we lack utility, or defensives rather, because most really high mythic keystones, bosses will one-shot you and mechanics one-shot you. So if you don't have immunities, then you're pretty much out of luck. And especially with defensive builds not being a thing anymore, since we're not able to swap gear sets, and not having those defensive legendaries, we're even more restricted than we were before. But other than that, the rotation feels fairly fluid to play, obviously. I am pretty low geared on the beta, but once I get more gear and more haste, it will feel probably even better. And even on AoE, I might be able to get some Frost Strikes in instead of having to spend all my runic power on a 6-second cooldown Glacial Advance. As far as single target goes, we don't have too many talent choices. It's basically the same choices that we have in Legion. It's either a Breath of Sindragosa build or an Obliteration build. We'll see what works out better, and a lot of our talent choices will come down to number tuning rather than fitting talents together that fit a certain theme. which for some people it might be a good thing, for others it may be not as much. Please let me know in the comment section what you think about the new Frost DK. What are your thoughts going into BFA? Are you going to main Frost after seeing these changes? And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and sub to the channel. And if you'd like to support this channel directly, you can check out my Patreon, which is linked in the description box. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.